Why is Goblin Piledriver never sad? Because he has protection from the blues.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang.
Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game has some old friends, some new decks, and a lot of fun. First up, Felix is playing his Eowyn deck, keeping Arcane Signet, Oath of Ural, Port Town, Tranquil Cove, 2 mountains, and an island. I am borrowing Felix's Smeagol deck, keeping 2 forests, Talisman of Resilience, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, Cabal Coffers, Uruk-hai Berserker, and Witch King of Angmar. Seb is playing their Kitt Kanto deck, keeping Parallel Lives, Sacred Foundry, Stomping Ground, Flooded Strand, Qasali Pridemage, Forest, and a Plains. Max is playing Trusty Araumi with Dread Return, Misty Rainforest, High Market, Lotus Field, Polluted Delta, Gyreach Sanitarium, and Shipwreck Marsh. Felix wins the die roll and starts us off. He plays a tapped Tranquil Cove, gaining 1. I play a Forest. Seb plays a Stomping Ground tapped. Max plays a Polluted Delta, losing 1 to sacrifice it to find a tap-fetid pools. Felix plays a Plains and casts Arcane Signet. I've got a Swamp for turn and cast Talisman of Resilience. Seb's got a Plains and pays a green and a white for Qasali Pridemage. Max plays another fetch land on his turn with a Misty Rainforest, sacrificing it to find a land as he passes. Felix just plays a mountain. I've got a forest and then cast Arcane Signet. I've got enough mana still for Smeagol and I pass after that. Seb plays out a Sacred Foundry for turn and then casts Loyal Apprentice. Going to combat, they swing the Loyal Apprentice at Max and the Qasali Pridemage at Felix. They both take their hits, and Seb then passes. Max draws and plays Gyreach Sanitarium. He passes after that. Felix has a mountain for turn, and then taps enough to cast Eowyn and passes. I draw and play the Yavimaya that I've had in my opening hand. I then cast Uruk-hai Berserker and designate Smeagol as my ring bearer. I then target Seb with the Smeagol Mill, and he mills only 1 card into a mountain, which I get to play. For combat, I then swing Smeagol at Max for 4, and pass. Seb's got a Forest for turn, and has enough mana to cast Kitt Kanto, which makes a Citizen token as it enters. They then go to combat, making a Thopter token from the Apprentice. Seb then swings the Loyal Apprentice at Max for 2, and passes turn. During their end step, Max activates Gyreach Sanitarium to have everyone draw a card and discard a card. Max plays a Shipwreck Marsh for turn, and then casts Sol Ring. He then brings out Araumi and passes to Felix. Felix draws and casts Knight of the White Orchid, going to find a Plains to put into play. He then plays a Plains from hand, and then casts Oath of Earls, making 2 1/1s. Going to combat, Seb taps the Pridemage and the Thopter to go to Eowyn and buff her thanks to Kitt Kanto. This has Felix then swinging her at Max, and the 2 Knight tokens she makes at Seb and I. Seb blocks 1 of them with Kitt Kanto, and I trade with my Uruk-hai Berserker, while Max just takes the hit. With nothing else, Felix passes. I draw and play a Swamp. I play Claim the Precious on Eowyn, and the ring continues to tempt me. This time I mill Felix until I hit another land. And once that's done, cast Witch King of Angmar. Going to combat, Seb taps Kitt Kanto and a Citizen to goad and buff Smeagol, and I decide to swing him at Felix. Felix declares no blocks, and I get to draw a card and discard a card from the Ring Bearer trigger. He then connects, and I pass after that. Seb plays a mountain for turn, and then play a Talisman of Unity. Once that's out, Parallel Lives joins the party. Seb then goes to combat, making 2 Thopter tokens from the Loyal Apprentice trigger. They then use 2 of them to goad the Loyal Apprentice as they move to combat, and swing the Apprentice at Max. Max takes the 4, and Seb then passes. Max draws and activates Gyreach Sanitarium to make everyone draw a card and discard a card. He then plays a Swamp for turn, and once he's done that, casts Dread Return to bring back Junji from his graveyard, and he passes to Felix. Felix draws, and upticks Oath of Errol, making 2 Night tokens. He then plays Glacial Fortress, and recasts Eowyn. Going to combat, Felix makes 2 more Night tokens, and Seb also gets their Kitt Kanto trigger, goading one of the Night tokens by tapping 2 creatures. Felix then swings the goaded Knight at me, and 4 of the other Knights at Seb. Both Seb and I declare no blocks and take our hits. And after I take damage, Felix sacrifices the goaded Knight to the Witch King trigger, and the ring tempts me once more. I use the Smeagol trigger to target Seb, to get a Plains off the top. In Felix's second main phase, he casts Esper Sentinel. I draw and play a Swamp. Going to combat, Seb goads the Witch King, and I swing it at Felix, and Smeagol goes at Seb. Once more, neither of them block, and I get to draw a card from being the Ring Bearer as well. After combat, I cast Sepulchral Primordial, reanimating Baragond of the Guard and an Iroas's Champion. With nothing else, I pass to Seb. Seb draws and plays Canopy Vista. They then play Sword of Hearth and Home and equip it onto Kitt Kanto. Going to combat, Seb makes 2 Thopters and decides to swing Kitt Kanto at Felix. Felix takes the commander damage, and Seb gets a sword trigger, flickering Kitt Kanto to make more tokens as she comes in, and grabs a forest into play. After that, Seb pays to re-equip the sword onto Kitt Kanto and passes. Max draws and plays a High Market. He then plays Mission Briefing, Surveilling 2, and pays the 1 for the Esper Sentinel. He targets Dread Return, which he then casts for the mana to bring back Emery. With Emery entering, Max mills 4 more cards. Moving to combat, Seb goads Junji, and Max swings it at Felix for 7. Felix takes the hit, and after that, Max passes. Felix draws and becomes the Monarch from the Oath of Earl. He then plays a Sulphur Falls, and casts Champion of the Parish, and then a Thraben Doomsayer. Going to combat, Felix makes 2 more Night tokens, and then Seb goads Eowyn thanks to Kitt Kanto. Felix decides to go all out at Max with the Night tokens, Eowyn, and Knight of the White Orchid. Before moving to blocks though, Max sacrifices Junji to the High Market and chooses the On Death mode to reanimate Archon of Cruelty. The Archon trigger targets Felix, who sacrifices a soldier, discards an island, and takes 3, while Max gains 3 and draws 3. Max then blocks Eowyn with the Archon and a Knight with Araumi, but takes the rest. After that, Felix passes, drawing from being the Monarch. I draw and play Command Tower, and then go to combat. Seb goads the Witch King, and I swing Smeagol at Max, the Witch King at Felix, and everything else at Seb. Max chumps Smeagol with Emery, Seb chumps the Primordial with a Thopter, and the Iroas's Champion gets stopped with Kitt Kanto, while Felix just takes the 7. I also get a loot trigger from the Ring Bearer, and I move to my second main phase, casting Soul Ring. I then go to my end step, and the ring tempts me from Smeagol since something died, and I choose Seb again and get a forest. After that, I pass. Seb draws and goes to combat, making 2 Thopter tokens. They then go to Thopter with Kitt Kanto's ability, and swing it at Felix to steal a Monarchy after dealing 3 to him. Seb then draws at the end of turn and passes. Max draws and plays Phyrexian Tower. He then uses Araumi to encore the Archon of Cruelty, making 3 copies. The first Enter the Battlefield trigger targets Felix to take him out, while the 2 others target me. I sacrifice 2 creatures, discard 2 cards, and take 6, while Max draws 3 and gains 9 life. Going to combat, Seb goads the Archon that's coming at them, and Max swings 2 Archons at me, and 1 at Seb. Max points all the attack triggers at Seb, so they discard 3, lose 9, and sack 3, while Max gains an additional 9 life and draws 3 cards. I then take 12 in the air, while Seb takes 6. And after damage, Max sacrifices one of the Archon tokens that came at me to the Witch King trigger. Max then sacrifices another Archon copy to the Phyrexian Tower, and uses the mana to cast Apprentice Necromancer, and passes. I draw and play an Expedition map. I then crack it for a Rogue's Passage, and I then play the Rogue's Passage and go to combat. This has Seb goading the Witch King, which I swing at Max for 7, who takes the hit. After combat, I replay Smeagol, and then pass turn. During my end step, Seb casts a Grand Crescendo, putting only 6 into the X but getting 12 tokens thanks to the parallel lives. Seb draws and plays a Professional Facebreaker, and then moves the sword over onto the Thopter. Going to combat, Seb makes 2 more Thopters and taps 2 creatures to goad the Quasali Pridemage. Seb then swings the Sworded Thopter at me, and the Pridemage, Thopters, and Citizens at Max. Max gets taken out as a result, and I take 3. And we get a trigger from the Witch King and the Sword. Seb sacrifices a Thopter to the Witch King trigger, and then uses the Sword trigger to blink Kitt Kanto, making more tokens and finding another land. I also get tempted from the ring, so I mill Seb until I hit a Plains. After that, Seb re-equips the sword onto Kitt Kanto and passes. I draw and use Rogue's Passage on the Witch King to make it unblockable. It swings at Seb, dealing a total of 8 damage, and I loot again on an empty hand. Before damage, Seb sacrifices some treasures they made from the Professional Facebreaker to exile their top 3 cards, but doesn't find an answer to stop it. Seb then drops to 4, and in my second main phase, I cast Sir Conrad. At this point I need a ton of luck, and I activate him twice, but unfortunately hit no creatures. Without the needed extra damage from Sir Conrad to close out the game, I know I'm dead to Seb's massive backswing next turn, and I scoop it up to them. Game review time. This game was 56 minutes and 13 seconds. So Kitt Kanto continues to prove that they can be very problematic by making your opponents swing their best creatures at each other. I thought it was also really neat to see that Seb used it on their own creatures, although once the Sword of Hearth and Home was out, things became a little bit more complicated since it gave protection from white and green. Smeagol seemed kinda fun. I didn't get a ton of temp triggers, which meant I didn't get a ton of mill triggers, and it seemed like the few times that I did, unfortunately the top card was a land. I really like Eowyn. I think she's particularly aggressive. She comes with a decent mechanic which gets you a bigger board, plus can draw you some cards late game, and as we saw with Felix, it seemed like as soon as she was out, he put the pedal to the metal in terms of attacking, and didn't stop the whole game. While Araumi didn't necessarily do particularly much early game, as you saw the late game, with the Archon of Cruelty, things can escalate very quickly. Max has done some pretty broken stuff with Archon of Cruelty, and this turn in particular was brutal. He took out one opponent and was able to almost cripple 2.
This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.